Hello and welcome to our webinar today, hosted by InsideSales.com. We're going to be talking about the perfect sales demo, less product and more prospect. Excited to introduce the man of the hour, but before I do that, we want to play a short clip while we have a couple other people join. And I'm going to do that now.
Majestic Billings. This is my second year at Code Camp. After Code Camp last year, I still continued programming, and I was invited to actually teach programming with HTML and CSS to college students. And I have been asked to be a member of the SDS team, which is a team of Scratchers, people that use Scratch. Usually, programming tutorials are just a page that says do this and you'll have this result, but at the coding camp they actually explain why you do this and things like that. I like to code because you can do anything with coding. You can create something that is impossible in real life, like a flying tree with rainbow leaves.
All right, fantastic. Let's get into the nitty-gritty here. So, a couple housekeeping items before we begin. One, you're seeing on the screen here, I got to make a plug for our podcast, the InsideSales.com podcast. If you haven't checked it out, myself, co-host Steve there, talking about real problems, real solutions with real people. We do 2 episodes a week. Check it out at InsideSales.com podcast and subscribe and leave a review. We do have a great downloadable that you can see here in your On24 screen. It's how InsideSales.com and Consensus, work together. You may need to refresh your screen to get that, but that's a great downloadable that I'd recommend you pull. I'm going to turn it over here to our co-presenter here in just a second. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so if you do want to ask Q&A either at the end or jump in and do it during, we'll also answer any Q&A kind of as the session goes on. I'd love to, while I'm kind of chatting here, there's a little box down there that says Q&A. If you can type in your name and where you're coming from, meaning state or city, just so I make sure you understand that Q&A box. I really want this to be interactive, and I know Matt does as well. If you can go ahead and do that. Looks like we've got some people coming in. Tom, Mary, Susan. Perfect. That's what I'm looking for. Good. So without further ado, let's get into kind of the meat of the show here. I'm Gabe Larson, Director of InsideSales.com Labs. Been with the company 3 years, excited about the conversation of really getting better at our demos today. I'm going to let Matt just probably do a little bit of introduction with himself, but I got to say, the guy's been in software sales technology for a long time, co-founder and CRO of Consensus, formerly Demo Chimp, for those of you who are familiar with that name. But he's been growing sales systems in tech companies for a full decade. Funny story, he actually started a call center in the Philippines, and one of his competitors chopped his legs off by getting the police involved and trying to actually shut him down. So the guy's been doing it not only in the U.S. but overseas. Matt, anything else you'd add to your introduction? Oh, Matt, did I lose you? Uh-oh, Matt might be having some technical difficulties. Matt, if you're on mute, jump off mute and join us. We're anxious to hear from you. Matt, are you still there? I'm just chatting Matt now to see if I can get him back in. He's had a couple technical difficulties. He's dialing back in. So we'll skip his introduction and go right into kind of the session as he jumps back in. But I'm really excited about the topic at hand. Consensus is a great partnership with InsideSales.com, and we're going to be diving into these 6 areas that I think are going to really show you how to be thinking about doing demos slightly differently. In the old world, it was just going through product and features. In the new world, there's some really interesting stuff and some data that Matt and Consensus are bringing to the table, not just through some of their research, but through their technology as well. Stuff we're seeing in the brain and how people are thinking. The power of storytelling, this one is fascinating. Some of the research and how it can really bring people into your environment and just lock them in as you move forward. These 3 laws of persuasion and some of the data behind what people are thinking in order to act. Oh, is that Matt? Are you back?
I'm here. I don't know what happened. I could.
You were just fine. I did a subpar introduction of you. And I was just going over kind of the agenda here, talking about some of the things around storytelling, the 3 laws of persuasion, and then as we get into the demo, and I think that the example that Matt's put at the end is pretty darn powerful. But Matt, maybe you can, I'll hand it over to you quickly, just briefly hit this introduction on the agenda, and let's dive into the fun stuff.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think I was in shock because you brought up that painful memory of mine.
Oh, you did
being
hear
in the
the
Philippines.
Yeah.
I did hear that. Yeah, experiencing the joys of international business and getting put out of business in an underhanded way. I actually made it out of the country okay, but my partner spent 30 days in a Filipino prison before finally bribing his way out. It's a crazy story. It should be a movie. I'll have to tell you sometime. So I'm really excited about this topic. It's something I'm very passionate about. A long time ago in my undergrad, I was studying psychology. Thought I wanted to be, a therapist. Realized that was a horrible thing for me, but the love for psychology stuck. And the study of the brain and behavior has always been one of my biggest hobbies. So it's worked well as I've gone into software sales and marketing and trying to understand how to best interact with people on an individual level and at scale. And so today I'm really excited to be sort of presenting a lot of the things that I've learned over the years in terms of brain function and why that matters for demoing and selling, why storytelling matters. A lot of what we talk about today is going to be studying storytelling and how to work that into your demo. I've been on the receiving end of hundreds of demos, and I can actually recall 2 companies that ever told stories. And after we look at the research today, I think you're going to be as shocked about that as I am right now. And so we'll get into, I apologize, Gabe, if you introduced these already. I didn't hear that portion of it before I dropped off. But we'll talk about 3 laws of persuasion and that we've learned from TED Talks. So that should be really interesting. Then I'm actually going to give you a framework of how to create your story, the one you should be using in your demo. And then another framework for what you should be doing pre-demo, during the demo, and post-demo to give your client the perfect experience. So let's get into that. So, whoops, here we go. Okay, so what you should walk away with, it's a plan for creating your own brain massaging, highly persuasive, memorable, story-based, interactive demo framework, or your world's best demo. So it's going to be, it's going to differ industry to industry. So it really, I'll give you some examples, but really be thinking, of course, how this applies to you. And I think the framework should give you the ability to walk away with what you need. So let me get to, sorry, it's skipped a little bit. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so I want to start with a story. So if any of you have ever heard of a gentleman named Paul Zak, he was a neurologist at Berkeley, and he did some fascinating research. He started, his research was based around this story. And as you can see in this picture, there's a son, a boy named David, and his father, Ben. And David was, his father, the story essentially talked about how David's father had a really hard time being happy around David. And because David had cancer, and David's father knew that he only had 3 to 6 months to live. Now David didn't really understand this, and so he was, he was very happy when he was playing, and so the story was about how his father really struggled to see that, to be around his son that was so happy when he as a father sort of had this impending fear in the back of his mind. And so this was the story. I apologize for starting with such a heavy story, but there's likely an interesting thing happening to each of you that heard that story. And it's the same thing that Paul Zak discovered in his research. So interestingly, he knew that story had a profound effect on people. And so he decided to take blood samples before and after telling that story. Now, what we discovered is that cortisol levels increased and oxytocin levels increased. And so if those are familiar to you at all, oxytocin increases empathy, feelings of caring, and feelings of connection. And cortisol is basically the hormone that focuses our attention on something, gives us the ability to focus. So those are two very critical things that need to happen in a sales process. Obviously, it's a different thing thinking about the story that I told and a sale, but the research was very interesting in that those that heard the story, so after they told them the story, they gave them a chance to donate money to a charity. And so the people that heard the story donated money. The people that did not hear the story did not donate money. The story had a very profound effect. Now, what was interesting is they reran the study, but this time trying to predict who would donate and how much they would donate based on some different things that they were measuring: heart rate, brain function, things like that, correlated with the data that they had before from taking the blood samples. And what they found was that they could actually predict how much people would donate with 80% accuracy, which is incredible in a scenario like that, just the impact of a story. So what does this have to do with sales and giving the perfect demo? Well, stories change our brain chemistry. It's a fact, and they affect the way that we remember and the way that we make decisions. So remembering what a sales rep is saying and using that to make decisions is the essence of purchasing behavior. Now, what's interesting here is that why this matters even more is that there's a massive problem in the B2B sales industry. Some of you, if you've watched some other things that I presented on, you may have seen this, but it remains one of the largest problems in B2B sales. So if it takes 4 months to train a rep, and then a rep is spending 1 to 2 hours with a mobilizer or your prospect, then that prospect says, "Hey, thanks for the information. I'm going to go back and talk to my team." the rest of those stakeholders, they're actually typically a sales rep is giving them facts, giving them dry descriptions of a use case, things like that. And those are difficult to communicate with accuracy and emotion and really influence. One, because the mobilizer doesn't know it very well, they're not good at it. But another thing, because it's difficult for them to connect powerfully with these other stakeholders. So they need to be telling stories, right? So that's why I'm emphasizing this so much. Now, typically, most people are kind of focused, most sales professionals are focused on this interaction with the mobilizer. But if you're doing it correctly, if you're giving the best demo possible, you absolutely need to be emphasizing coaching the buying process, working with that, enabling that mobilizer in a way that they can tell amazing stories, and that the broader stakeholder buying group has everything that they need to make a confident purchase decision. So so today there's a lot that goes into that, and we should do we'll do another webinar on that, I'm sure, down the road. But this is really about how to during the demo, how to equip your mobilizer or your sales champion with stories that they can then use to go tell internally. Even more, this is from the Challenger Customer, which is the sequel book to the Challenger Sale, written by CEB. 80% of buyers, excuse me, want more support from suppliers in communicating the value of the solutions that they championed. So they really struggled with this, and what the industry doesn't seem to recognize yet is that they're just lacking stories. So let's get into kind of a story framework and the power of persuasion, I guess, that's inside of these stories. So this I pulled from a presentation about a book called Talk Like TED. I'm sure most of you are familiar with TED Talks. They've had over 1 billion views at this point, which is absolutely incredible. And TED Talks tend to follow a pretty specific formula. So there's some learning that can be had from studying TED Talks that this book, Talk Like TED, explains. It really breaks it down to 3 things: that it has to be emotional, has to touch your heart, has to be novel or new, and it has to be memorable, presented in a way that they won't forget. So just looking at this a little bit, sorry. Keep skipping slides. Okay, so in order for making it emotional, it really starts with the sales rep. The sales rep has to find a way to feel passionate about what they're talking about. Larry Smith said, "Passion is the thing that will help you create the highest expression of your talent." When you feel passionate about something, is audio cutting out for more people? Quentin said it's cutting out for him or her.
No, it seems to be working. It's working fine for me.
Okay, I'll keep going, and
we'll keep watching. Yeah,
okay.
We'll keep watching.
Okay, great. So when we're talking about the perfect demo, you have to lead with passion. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, well, how can I feel passionate about accounting software or whatever your product is? And that can be a difficult thing to figure out. For me, what it's really come down to is finding something about the problem that the product solves that I care about. When I'm selling software or selling anything, I really find passion in helping the person that I'm talking to solve a problem that's meaningful for them. That's where I find passion, in really being able to sell anything and feel passionate about it. So I would recommend, really focusing in on what's that problem that you can solve that makes a difference in the person's life, and let that fuel your passion. Now, it's interesting, there's more research, I won't go deep on this, but research has shown that passion is actually contagious. This is not just a feel-good thing, this is an actual tactic to help you sell more. If you can be passionate about what you're selling, you will have more influence over the people that you're talking to. So their research basically said if you meet someone who's genuinely passionate about a product or idea, it will influence your perception of that product or idea. So really important to have passion. Now, second, or equally as important is the art of storytelling. So looking again at the brain on stories, so at Princeton University, Yuri Hassan does research on storytelling by attaching electrodes to people. He finds that when somebody tells a story, certain parts of the brain light up. And why is this interesting? Well, his research went on to show is that the parts of the brain that were lighting up in the storyteller were actually the same parts of the brain that were lighting up in the listener. And so they tested it against other things and found that when you're telling a story, so when I say story, I'm talking about the correct structure for a story. When you're telling a story that resonates with the person, your brains are lighting up in the same way and you feel this connection. It's a really fascinating thing. If you're interested in that kind of thing, definitely look into it. Let's get on to the second part of this. So we talked about it being emotional, right? Bringing passion and using storytelling. And I'll teach more about storytelling in a moment, but it also has to be novel or new. CEB talks about this as being a commercial insight, if you've studied their materials. But really, biologically, a fresh, new, and unexpected twist on an old idea releases dopamine, which is your brain's natural save button. There was an interesting study done that it was looking at students and memory and trying to figure out what the best tactic was for memorizing something. And so most people think that repetition is the best way to remember something, but repetition actually didn't correlate with increased memory. Amazingly, it just doesn't correlate. What does correlate, though, is heightened emotion. If you're experiencing heightened emotion, you remember. So you remember more of it. So so making something new triggers emotion typically, right? It's surprise or it's shock or just a fascination with something new increases memory. So moving on to the third thing that this book talks about as being key to great presenting or is making it memorable. Now, what this really boils down to, at least from the way that they approached it, is a couple of things. Making sure that, the obvious things, don't talk too long. And then the other thing is, so in sales, you break that up with questions. Nobody likes to sit and listen to a 20, 30-minute demo without talking. This is a really interesting thing that they found. Speaking for too long results in cognitive backlog, which, like piling on weights, makes the mental load on your audience heavier and heavier until they forget everything that you said. So it's really, really interesting, right? People think they're giving more and more of this quality information, but what they're really doing is ruining their chances of having the client remember anything that they're saying and be able to communicate that to the other stakeholders. So you're literally hurting your chances by not simplifying your message down to a story that's very memorable.
Hey, Matt, a couple questions.
Yeah.
Real quick to interrupt. Couple points or maybe questions that have come through. One that's probably particular here is just about timing. I mean, you mentioned, people don't want to be talked at for 20, 30 minutes. Do you have any good thoughts or data research around times? Meaning, if you're going to do a demo for somebody, should you keep it at a certain length, or should you try to chunk it and you only talk for a certain amount of time and then turn it over to them? Or how would you coach somebody on timing?
Yeah, so I would break it up into sections. I would never talk for more than 3 to 4 minutes at a time without getting some kind of feedback. So that's kind of my general feeling, and I'm going to actually later when I show the framework on kind of giving an amazing demo, I think you'll see how I recommend breaking up. So if it's okay, I'll do that a little later.
Continue on.
Okay, so yeah, was that it?
Nope, that's good. You're good for now.
Okay, awesome. So moving on, so pictures end up being a really key part to making something more memorable. So if you hear information delivered verbally, you'll remember 10%. If there's a picture, retention soars to 65%. So really fascinating there. One thing that I really want to point out here is that there's been this trend in the industry of people talking about death by PowerPoint. Sales reps, oh, I don't want to use a PowerPoint. I don't want to present that way. Well, death by PowerPoint is simply talking for too long and presenting information that isn't personalized or isn't in the context of their business. The pictures that you can use in PowerPoint, or the way that PowerPoint can allow you to tell a story, is still unmatched outside of video. And in video, you can't necessarily personalize it. So don't shy away from PowerPoint. Just make your PowerPoints amazing and make sure that they support your story in the way that I'll talk about in a second. Okay. So what this all kind of boils down to is that at least the physiological side of it is that we are hardwired to respond to the hero's journey story. There's a lot of research that backs this up, but that's the way that people have been teaching people for thousands of years. It's through this hero's journey story. Research this if you're interested in this kind of thing, because it's fascinating how they discovered that the hero's journey story was being told, thousands of years ago. We are hardwired that when the hero's journey is presented to us, we produce oxytocin, right? It feels good. And the other hormones that I talked about, right? It increases empathy and it increases memorability. So what I'm going to explain right now is how you build a hero's journey story, taking into account all the things that we've talked about so far, and work that into a sales demo. Okay. So there are a number of elements to this story that are really critical. First, it starts with a relatable hero. That's your target customer. We've heard this, across sales. There's, recommendations 1,000 times a day on Twitter that say, it's not about you, it's about your customer. But what most sales reps tend to do naturally is they try to talk about themselves or the product or the company that they represent as the hero, but it's not. The hero has to be the target customer, and you'll see why in a second. The next element to it is that you have to describe the world that they exist in. They have to have relatable context. I'm just going to go quickly through this and then give you an example of the story and then summarize these points again. The third element is that there has to be a call to adventure, right? So there has to be a problem that the hero has to solve. Again, this is the problem that the hero is solving, not the problem that your product solves necessarily yet. The next element is that there has to be a potential failure. You have to explore what it's like to fail, what the consequences could be. A really important element in these hero's journey stories to make it interesting. And a lot of times this shows up as, or the way that CEB talks about it, it's the implications of not solving the problem. Next shows up a helper. Now this one's kind of difficult to understand as you're thinking about this product. A lot of times it's, hey, let's say for consensus, if I was doing this incorrectly, I might say, well, I've got my, we sell to sales reps that use InsideSales.com, and we help them to reach more stakeholders and deliver personalized automated demos. And so, that's how consensus is going to save the day. What's different about a correct story versus an incorrect story? A correct story actually positions you as helping the hero to achieve their goal rather than, focusing, taking a more narrow approach and saying, here's a general problem in the market, and here's how we solve it, and we're the hero. So it's really interesting, and this will become more clear as I show the example in a moment. The next element to the hero's journey story is the magical item. So this is your offer, your brand promise. This example from Forever Spin, as they're telling their story, they're selling tops, right? Spinning tops. But this was one of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns in the history of Kickstarter. And if you just read this, it comes through clearly. Every spinning top that leaves our hands to become part of your life, right there, it's become more than a spinning top. There's a brand promise that they're going to deliver something meaning in your life. And we mean every single one is built on the same belief that a top is more than just a toy, that above all, a top must be absolutely simple, elegant, and built forever. In these stories, your brand promise becomes really important because it's connecting with them on an emotional level and saying, hey, you're simple, you're elegant, you're built forever. That may not make sense literally, but it would cause them to connect with it emotionally. So the next element is that at this point in the story, there has to be a glimpse at failing, a trial of alternatives. What would happen if they took one road versus the other? And an exploration of that. And then the triumphant return. They made the right decision. They live happily ever after. They return back to that world that you described earlier, but they're better having gone through the journey. So let me summarize. You have to have a hero. That's your prospect. You have to explain their world. That's the context and the problem that they're living in. You have to explore failure, what the consequences would be. They have to find hope, and then which is your brand promise. And then there has to be an offer, and that's basically how you can help. So it goes brand promise, and then how you can help is more specifically how the hero can use your offer to succeed. Then they have to face the trial, right? They're looking at alternatives, and then they're successful, and they have the successful journey home, I guess, or the happily ever after. So let me give you an example of this. This is a lot of text, but I'm just going to read it. I want you to not read along with me and just listen. So here, I want to talk to you about a sales rep that uses InsideSales.com. He's very hardworking. He's bright. He does everything he can to be successful, especially leveraging the highest technologies. His company has good intentions, but they don't always treat him well or enable him well enough. He hits quotas sometimes, but he's driven to crush it for his family and for his career, and he's worried that missing quota means his career potential takes a hit. So one day, he realized that he was relying too much on sales champions. He wasn't getting the right messaging to all the right stakeholders. He knew that if he didn't fix it, he would keep producing mediocre quarterly numbers and be stuck in his current role for too long with an average close rate. When checking his email one day, he saw an invitation to watch an automated personalized demo from Consensus, and an idea clicked for him. He could send automated demos that personalize messaging to each stakeholder. For a moment, he considered just sending static videos or PDFs, but realized that few would view it without the messaging being personalized, and he wouldn't get the amazing discovery insights that Consensus promised. So he fought to get Consensus in his organization, and he implemented it with intensity. At the next quarterly sales meeting, he reported impressive close rates, a faster sales cycle, and 120% quota attainment. He went on to lead the team 6 months later. So this is an example of the hero's journey, as told in the of Consensus. But the hero is the sales rep. Now, a sales rep is going to identify with this 100 times more than they're going to identify with a simple demo that it shows the features and what they can do. This is a story where they can say, that's me. And that's a story that they can go tell other sales reps. It's a story they can go tell their leaders and try to drive change in the organization. It's a story that is memorable to them because it hits home in terms of, hey, I'm fighting for my family and for my career, and this problem of not being able to get the right messaging to the right stakeholders, and not coaching, being able to coach the buying process is hurting my ability to be the hero. So all of this sort of happens subconsciously, right? Now, you wouldn't just read a story to your client, of course, like this. So that's what I want to get into next is sort of how you're working this story into an actual demo. So just a reminder, right, you want to use images, ask questions at the right times to make it memorable and emotional and of course interactive. Again, you don't want to be talking for too long. So the next things that I want to show you are getting into, so I just realized there are a couple of questions asking for something that I don't have in this presentation, but there's enough people asking for it. I'm going to create it and make sure that we get it out to everybody. So what I'm going to talk about now are basically kind of shifting gears. We've talked about stories a lot. The question remains, how do you work a story into the perfect demo? Right now I'm going to talk about a framework for the demo, and then we'll get back to melding the two together. So the pre-demo checklist. These are things that you should be doing before every demo to make sure that you're personalizing information and among other things. So this is just what our sales team does and what I recommend. You need to understand the person. You can check Google, Twitter, Facebook for that. Understanding their role, check it on LinkedIn. You need to understand the typical buying group structure and buying process ahead of time. So remember that slide that I showed earlier that most people, sales professionals, are just focused on the one-to-one interaction with a single prospect, but really that's only recognizes half of what needs to happen for a purchase to go through. The other half is the buying process, so you really need to be shifting your mindset and becoming a buying coach. So understanding these things ahead of time is key. You need to understand their business. You need to understand current news about them. You need to edit your deck, what you're presenting to them, to include the things that you've learned about them. I can't emphasize that enough. It changes fundamentally the experience that your buyer has when there are personalized things being presented in front of them. Then I recommend sending a pre-appointment email with a personalized note. Obviously, Inside Sales Vision is perfect for that. Send a day of the appointment email with a personalized note. So that's kind of the pre-demo checklist. And a number of people have asked if we'll share the deck afterwards. I'm fine with that. Okay. So what I recommend is taking this pre-demo checklist, and this process takes 20 minutes. You go through those things, and then you put that into a slide like this. So this is an example of what we would present to our clients. We would have their company logo up here. We would then have details about what we know about them, what we know about their company, what we know about what our recommendation for a use case is based off on our research, and what we think the expected results might be. The conversation that you can have around a slide like this is incredible. If you're not doing this in your sales process where you're prepping ahead of time and then presenting something like this that guides your discovery questions, you're really, really missing out, and I'm certain that you'll see an increase in your close rate just from that. So, let me get through these. Some nice animations. So that's kind of pre-meeting prep. So now I'm going to talk about a framework for what to do during the demo. I believe we have about 15 minutes left, and then we'll get to some more in-depth Q&A. The first thing that you should do in a demo is agree on the goal of the meeting. When someone comes to the meeting, you don't really know what their expectations are, and so launching into or trying to demand that the meeting go a certain way can often end up in mismet expectations, which is it kills all deals. So agreeing on the goal of the meeting. So we would present a slide, something like this, that says, hey, I just, before we get started, I really want to understand what, what you wanted to get out of this. My hope is that by the end of this meeting, you've learned enough about consensus, if I was demoing consensus, you've learned enough about consensus that you can make a decision on whether the next meeting makes sense for you. Does that sound like it? So something like that, right? You're just confirming what the goal of the meeting is. The next thing that you need to do is present an agenda that's going to support or create a path to get to that goal. So the agenda that we typically present is, hey, let's first talk about kind of why this matters and what your interest is in us, why you agreed to a meeting in the first place. Then I want to kind of show you what I know about you and the research that I've done. So let me kind of go through that. Then I'm going to demo. Then we'll talk about expected results and then next steps. This usually gets a great reaction from the people that we're talking to, and it creates a path again to the goal of the meeting. So once you've presented the agenda and made sure that they like it and support it, then you're getting into the why and the what. Now to them, it's, to you this is discovery, but to them it's a personalized experience that they're not getting from anyone else likely. Presenting this slide with the research that you've done at this point allows you or guides your discovery discussion in a really fantastic way. So once you've done that, you've done the discovery, now it's time to demo. And this is where you're fitting in this story, right? So the demo typically, what I see over and over and over again is, let me just give you a brief overview of our product. I'll walk you through the features, and then we can see what questions you have. That is again going back to if you're giving them, showing them features without context, or outside of the context of a story, it's not going to bring up the emotion, generate oxytocin and cortisol that has to happen for it to be memorable. And you're also not going to give them a story that they can then go share with others. You're just giving them a list of facts. So again, in summary, don't give a list of facts. Do it in the context of a story so that it's memorable and emotional. Now, the questions that were coming in were, hey, can you, basically, asking for an example of how would you tell a story like that on a software demo. I'm going to put something together, like I said, and we'll send it afterwards. Because I actually didn't prepare it for this, but I wanted you to have the story framework, and then as you're kind of thinking through, hey, how can I tell that story while demoing the software? It's a really valuable exercise, and what you create is going to be better than what I can share anyway. But I will produce an example of that and that you can see. So then you go through the demo and the story, and a couple of key points, right, to remember. Your story should be user-focused. It should follow the hero's journey, and don't leave out elements. I've talked to so many people about this. They get into building their hero's journey demo story, and they feel awkward doing one part or the other. You just have to keep massaging it and working with it until you have every element of the hero's journey in there. I promise that will be the most effective. Make sure that you're using images. Don't be scared of PowerPoint. Use it. It just has to be used in the right way and not 20 minutes at a time. And it's going to increase memory. And then make sure that you're asking metric questions. So we hadn't talked about this before, but as you're going through your demo, a lot of people, they ask sort of confirmatory questions that are really weak. Confirmatory questions don't do a lot, but metric-based questions do a lot. So an example of that would be if I were talking to Gabe, and let's say I was asking so for consensus, for example, if I know that my product can increase his close rate because I can reduce the number of deals that fall apart by the wrong message, or the not getting the right messaging to the right stakeholders. I'm going to ask Gabe questions like, how many stakeholders are in your typical buying group? If Gabe doesn't know that, it already establishes me or gives me authority to help him to teach him about his buying group. If I say, how many deals do you know fall apart without having reached every stakeholder in the buying group with the right messaging? Well, they have no idea. So it's these very specific questions, right, that bring attention to the problem that you solve. Okay. So we're almost done. After you've kind of told your hero's journey, taken them along that journey with you, made them the hero in the story, they're going to have some questions about specifics, right? Because you didn't go straight into the features and the integrations and all of those things. So after you've done the demo story, you need to make sure that you have a specific conversation around product fit. So what I recommend for something like this is a simple slide that really drives that conversation, where you're asking the right questions. So for me, it might be, is buyer dysfunction a problem for you? If you don't agree with that, we don't have a lot to talk about. Can consensus fit into your workflow? If there's something about your sales workflow that doesn't work with us, then we don't. Again, it's not a fit. Do we meet your integration needs? Then we're getting into buying coaching. Who else is involved in the decision? What do you need to meet their needs? So it's what I see far too often is sales reps showing features. They might talk about benefits too, or they might even do a great job of talking about benefits, and then they just say, okay, what do you think are next steps? This product fit discussion leads very nicely into a buying coaching discussion, where you take control of driving the buying process rather than being relaxed about the next steps after the demo. That may be the most critical thing that you take away from this webinar, is the fact that you need to ask direct questions to coach the buying process. So again, when you start to ask these questions, right, you're going to get information that you really should be capturing on this slide that you've been showing them, that you built before the demo, and that you can send them after the demo. That gives them a really nice summary and more digestible summary of what you talked about and what really matters. And again, they're going to remember this and use this more in their internal conversations than you just restating them or giving them bullets in bullet points in an email. So use that slide again as a fantastic tool for that. Okay, last step, right, is talking about next steps and coaching the buying process. Don't ever say, what do you think are the best next steps? Never, ever, ever ask that question. Before the next step conversation has a chance to come up, bring up a slide like this that shows a timeline with specific steps of how a typical client buys your product. This should drive the discussion, nothing else. Open-ended next step questions are the worst thing that ever happened to sales, I think, outside of dialing manually, but inside sales fixed that, and in a great way. So use your timeline slide to talk about the buying process. Ken just asked, where does the demo of the product fit in? So I didn't do, in the examples that I was showing, I didn't show that, but the demo of the product fits in here, right? So after you've done the discovery, walk through your discovery with that you prepared for, answering some questions about what you didn't know, right? So you want to put down what you know here, but you want to have specific questions about what you don't know, and clients are, in my experience, always happy to give that information because they see the reasoning for it. So right after that, you have all the context that you need, right? You've done your discovery, then you can get in and do your demo story, and which I didn't show in this. So Ken, I apologize, I didn't have a good enough example of that. A lot of people ask for that, so I'm realizing that's key to this. But like I said, I'll produce something and we'll get it out to you. So that was it. That was kind of, you end with this timeline slide, and then it puts you in a position where you can do the proper follow-up. So post-demo, this is where it becomes critical again. Oh, yes. Aaron asked, are you saying edit the slide live? Yes, edit the slide live. That is what I'm saying. Pull that up and edit that slide live during it. It makes them feel like the level of attention that you're giving them is unique, right? They're not getting that experience from anyone else. So post-demo, if you've done all of this correctly, right, you took them along the hero's journey, you coached the buying process, you drove the timeline conversation, it puts you in a position where post-demo, you can be a project manager rather than an annoyance, right? Rather than saying, hey, I'm just checking in to see how your decision-making process is going, which nobody likes to hear, right? You have specific things that you can follow up on. You can ask them directly for what they've committed to doing. Hey, you said you were going to talk to this person, by this day. Were you able to do that? Right? Specific questions drive action. Open-ended questions get pushed off because everybody's busy. So, doing this correctly allows you to do, the next step is doing what you committed to do. Coaching the buying process, right? Post-demo, you're following up and you're saying, hey, we talked about, InfoSec being really critical to the sales process and affecting the timeline. Have you been able to start that process yet? And then lastly, enabling your buyer, right? Part of that coaching the buying process is asking questions like, who do you need to talk to? Well, I need to talk to my CEO. What does your CEO care about? Well, the CEO cares about numbers, so we need to see an ROI breakdown. Great. I'm going to get you an ROI breakdown. Don't rely on the sales champion to create that ROI breakdown or whatever else they need. Get to the specifics, do the work for them, and use these frameworks, and I'm certain that you'll be more successful. So that's what I have.
Awesome. Well, Matt, really appreciate it. I think that is some valuable information. I think we had a couple comments. It's definitely a lot of information. So for those of you who asked, we will, assuming Matt's okay with it, make this presentation in one way or another downloadable, or that you can get access to it. And certainly you'll be able to get access to this presentation on our website in our resources, InsideSales.com resources, if you'd like to watch it or send it to friends. So let's kind of wrap it up here, and I do want to jump into the Q&A just with a couple of the minutes that we do have left. Please do, as I mentioned, we'll get this to you later, but do grab that downloadable document, how InsideSales.com and Consensus works together. You can grab that in your resources here, and then we'll make sure we get you some of this tomorrow. With Matt and I, please do connect with us. I assume Matt would agree to the comment of always happy to continue the conversation. We're offended if you don't grab us on LinkedIn or Twitter, because we always like to debate and discuss these topics further. So as I move into the Q&A section, if you've got an extra couple minutes,
Gabe.
Oh, please go ahead. Yep.
Sorry, really quickly, I didn't get to, because I dropped off at the beginning of the call. I meant to mention this, but I am really excited about our partnership with you guys. So I don't know if everybody on the call knows, but Consensus has become one of the premier insider technology partners of InsideSales.com. So meaning we get early access to integrate with them. So our product is now, can become a seamless part of your process using Inside Sales, so that you can get the benefits of both. So anyway, I wanted to throw this out there. Inside Sales customers get 20% off of Consensus. So wanted to throw that out there.
Oh my goodness.
Thanks.
Oh, good to know. Yeah. No, appreciate that. So. Yeah, some great things as you start to see some of these technologies come together. I know that's a big problem. Companies saying, hey, I got so many vendors. How do these work together? And you're seeing a pretty strong partnership in some great ways that Consensus and InsideSales.com are building their platforms out together. So I've also flashed here another downloadable on optimizing your sales process. It's kind of a cheat sheet. Grab that if you'd like. You got the web link. But I want to get to a couple of these questions, Matt, if you just have a couple other minutes. Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we got a question from Carolyn here. She says, if a picture has a retention score, she says 65%. The question is, what is the impact of a video? Is there a time and a place or a time limit for a video piece in all of this?
Yeah, you're speaking near and dear about things near and dear to my heart. So I believe the place for video is not in a live demo, but before a live demo and after a live demo. So there's video has actually shown to be the most memorable asset that you can send, static asset that you can send to somebody. A live demo is even better than that because of the context, right, and the personal interaction that you can do. But the next best thing is definitely going to be video, and that's what our platform does. Our platform allows you to build and send and track video that's sent before and after a live demo. So we exist to educate the stakeholders outside of the live demo. But I mean, yes, video is super memorable. You can definitely communicate more in a shorter amount of time in video than you can in a live demo. So it has its place, and again, I think that's before and after a live demo.
Great. I couldn't agree more. A lot of questions, Matt, around building the actual story, and I know you alluded to that a few times.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe I could get an example in there. We got about 50 of those, so yeah, you might want to. But we had Aaron say, would love to hear maybe a summary on, if I'm trying to build a tight story. I know you kind of given us the framework. Any kind of other thoughts you'd say on, hey, if you're trying to get your story, start here?
Yeah, so if you're trying to get your story, Inside Sales has a great asset that's an example of this. They call it, I think, the day in the life of, and it's basically a user story. It might even follow the hero's journey framework. But yeah, the really key elements, if that you could change, literally this afternoon on the next demo that you take after this call, or next time you train your team, is just when you're doing the demo, just add a narrative. Do it on the fly. It doesn't matter. Just make it user focused. Say, yeah, so your use case is this, and your user is X. So I'm going to tell a story about how your user X would use our product to accomplish Y. So that's the first place that you can start for a really lightweight implementation of what I've been talking about, and then go from there. Is that what you were looking for, Gabe?
Yeah, I think so. And I am going to show. I'm going to send just everybody that link. I think. It's the link to our user story, and we created just as we were starting our partnership, Matt, with you. And so we've included some of those elements. I don't know if it's perfect, but I think it's a decent sample, because I know a lot of people are saying, is there a sample? Is there a sample to maybe see some sort of user story and how you kind of walk through that? One more click on the user story, Matt. A lot of people have. When they're doing demos, they're presenting to multiple people, and so coming up with a hero story. When I have a head of marketing in the room, and they may use my technology, I don't know, slightly different. I've got a sales operations. I got a head of sales. Do you recommend building a demo per persona, so to say, or how do you navigate that in the demo world?
Yeah, so if you're building, so for example, in our technology, it's a single link that you would share with multiple personas or stakeholders, and the content would actually change depending on which persona is watching it. So before and after the demo, absolutely. When you're on the demo, I guess it's you gotta call, make that call in the moment, but I would say stick to one user. I mean, if you have sales and marketing both using it, that's going to complicate the decision process. Typically, well, that's another story. Yeah, so I would recommend. Yeah.
Well, no, but I think the key was, I mean, there is a time and place for that. So tailoring certain content to personas. But it sounds like during the demo, if you've got a large group there, you've got to go with and I think we would all agree to that. Certainly, even with our own product, InsideSales.com, sales operations involved in marketing. But sales is the primary, quote-unquote, decision maker or use case. And so maybe you choose that primary use case and you run with that type of story.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're talking, that's a really good example. If your buyer is head of sales operations, then your user story, they need to understand how the sales teams use it, because that's their ultimate goal, is to enable the sales team. But I think there also needs to be a hero's story where the sales ops person is the hero. They're the focus of that story.
Yeah.
The big mistake that most people make, the big mistake most people make around these stories is making their company the hero rather than the buyer the hero or the user the hero.
They make it about them, not the customer.
Right.
I'm sure that happens often. Look how good we are. Look how big we are. Yeah, I assume that's a problem. Dang it, there's a couple more questions I wanted to get to, but we're already over. We better wrap this up. Certainly, again, continue the conversation with myself and Matt on social. You'll get some of this material. Matt, really appreciate you joining. Any closing remarks?
No, just, man, I'm freaking passionate about this stuff. I love it. So if you want to talk about it, I'm happy to. And then again, check out how Consensus and Inside Sales work together. It's a powerful 1-2 punch. And thanks everybody for taking the time.
Okay, appreciate it. Have a great day.